So I've been to the exhibit of some of the rarest comics in the UK, created all by people in the UK, and I don't think many people have seen this exhibit, so I'm going to share with you some of the greatest comics of all time. I'm going to stand within centimetres of things that are worth, conservatively, £1 million, or they are completely priceless. So yeah, let's have a good look round. We're going to see everything. There was things for the kids there as well, if you want to draw to create the next superhero or the next Dennis the Menace. Each section had a different card to explain the decade or the era. I'm going to share some of the significant artists with you, not everything, but Richard Newton here, for example, from 1792, political cartoonist, caricaturist, just to kind of start us off and show that history. And you'll see some of the through lines to some of the things we see today. So, for example, later on, we'll see some of the anarchic comics over in Scotland that pretty much create some of the satirical cartoons of today. I'm going to take you from some comics that I've never heard of and never seen before through to some of my absolute favourites. Getting to see these, whether they were originals or digital prints, was really exciting, particularly seeing the process, the sticking on and Tipp-Ex and the little stickers over words to change things. So they were broke down into sections. I'm going to try and keep it as chronological as possible. This one from 30s to 50s, where things really took off with DC Thompson up in Scotland with the Dandy and the Beano, all the way through to the Bruins and Owley, the Scottish ones, which strangely I was really into as a kid. There was a child at school and she was obsessed with them and she lent me all the books. So I started getting them. They were in the Scottish newspaper, I think called the Sunday Post. These kind of early ones here that we can see and can really see how they developed. It's pretty amazing to see things up close and personal, and I was luckily enough really that there was nobody there when I went to see this. Ken Reid is a name that comes up a lot, who came up with Roger the Dodger and did other titles in the Beano. If you ever read the Beano, you'll remember Roger the Dodger, this guy here and this one that we're looking at. Kind of almost like a proto Dennis the Menace kind of character, always trying to get out of things. He wasn't necessarily as proactive as Dennis. He was more about, tricks and schemes and things like that. So Roger the Dodger was a little bit more cerebral than Dennis the Menace. I wonder if you guys remember him as well. And Bob McGillivray, the Dandy as well, very, very famous for some other titles as well. There was loads of other titles. Now, if you were like me, I used to get a lot of my comic annuals from things like car boot sales and church fairs and things like that. So I would get ones dating back to the 60s, like Topper and Core and all of those ones that didn't exist when I was in my sort of my first decade as a child. I didn't really have these other ones other than the Beano and the Dandy, but I was able to go back and get things like Sparky and stuff like that people would donate. So I was aware of these characters. I was aware of, Hungry Horace and people like that who really didn't exist in the modern comics. As you can see on here, what was so good was just to see these, how the writing comes together. But if you really zoom in on them, you can see, how they added the lettering to the stories and, the sort of simple, funny stories that they did. It's so influential, and maybe a time in history that we don't really talk about very much, the British comics like this. We might talk about some of the ones later on, the British impact on comics like Watchmen and, people around those time, the Alan Moores of this world. But maybe we don't talk enough about some of the influences on things like Viz. We'll talk about Viz, but how we got to Viz, how these comics really influenced sort of an alternative comedic outlook. So like a lot of the alternative comedians from the 80s and 90s were probably influenced by these comics because they were a wild sense of humour and they really did get insane. Leo Baxendale being a good example of that, some of the stuff that he had Minnie the Minx getting up to, and a lot of the things really that we saw in the Beano really did influence the sense of humour of a generation. Leo Baxendale, Sweeney Toddler, and I've got a book of all of Leo Baxendale's work, that was the gooeyest, craziest, sort of wildest sort of comics that I absolutely loved as a kid, because there's so much going on in each panel. Look at this panel here. There's so much going on. You know, it was definitely a development from your standard Biffo the Bear or Desperate Dan or even Dennis the Menace. The Leo Baxendales of this world, they went that next step. Things were sort of messy and gooey and splattery, and there was like everything was crammed into the panels. It wasn't as you know, it was the polar opposite of Rupert the Bear. Now I had a grandma who wanted me to read kind of a little bit more proper fare, and she got me quite a few Rupert Bear annuals, and I read them. You know, they were all right. I don't know if you saw recently the Alan Partridge series where he accidentally dresses up as Rupert the Bear. But yeah, the Rupert annuals, I would have had a few of those in the 80s, but it wasn't as kind of exciting or as transgressive as a kid as reading some of the Sweeney Toddler type comics that I was really into. But they were really nice. They were more like art in a lot of ways. A lot of these. We'll look at some later on that you could. Well, they're all hung on walls, but you look at some of them and they could be hung up in legitimate art establishments. And here's the Bruins that I mentioned earlier, massively popular in Scotland to this day, actually, in the Scottish Sunday Post and the Fun Day Post, which was like the children's section of the Sunday Post. And there was some fun stuff in there, and I kind of learnt the lingo, you know, like they'd go down to the button bin and they'd have a granny suka to sweet, you know, like a sweet that would last a long time that a granny would suck on. So it was pretty amazing to see these, you know, the process. These are genuine and original panels, and you can see the process as you're going along. And I just, for me, that's why I took so long there watching these and taking pictures of them all, because I was just like, wow, like I really want to kind of pour over these and talk to you guys on the channel about it. So yeah, as you can see there, they have another Granny Suka. So it's like this whole family, but these ones a bit more like Face Ache, and ones that you would kind of see that were a little bit wild and wonderful. He could make his face do anything. Things like that were more my thing. But to be honest, what a lot of people forget is that we had our own versions of things. So we had British artists and writers doing our own versions of Looney Tunes. And later on, you'll see some other things that they did as well. So like own versions of things, for example, like the Marvel versions of Marvel comics that we had over here. So yeah, 1950s to 70s. We've also got here in 1958, one that I would say the sort of chrome look, the shiny look, beautiful really, of the Dan Dare Eagle comics. Again, that would have been the same grandparent who got me the Rupert the Bear annual, got me some Dan Dare things and the Mekon and all that. Because I used to find the Mekon a little bit scary as a child. I don't know if you're aware of what he looked like, but look at that sort of shiny chrome Rocketeer style influence, or vice versa. And some of these, like these in Express Weekly, look at that for artwork, look at that for colouring. You know, it's the time taken, the effort taken, and these were still seen as very much throwaway trash, you know, by a lot of people at the time. But as time's gone on, hopefully people realise just how incredible this artwork was. Wow. It is. I mean, it's something I would never be able to do. I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination, but to look at these and get to see them up close, you know, for me, this is really inspiring, beautiful looking stuff. This one here by Ron Embleton, you know, these weekly comics. And just to kind of give you an idea as well of what we've seen, and I've done these super slow so we can have a good look at them, you know, our own versions of things. So the Batman comics, our own versions of Batman comics, you know, created and sort of given a little bit of a spin, like a British spin on them. So I always like that. A black outlook. These were for reprints of annuals, 1960s. US reprints were in their annuals, but also some British ones too, like this one, The Archer Takes a Bow, and you kind of almost like a Robin Hood crossed with Batman, and you've got all the different stages here and how they put them across, and kind of break. Look at that, Zapeth. So influenced by the Adam West TV show as well, and kind of mixed into the comics. So yeah, it's great to see all of these different influences all kind of stirred up in a big pot. That was the Batman that I remember doing jigsaws of and colouring pictures of, this design of Batman, which was definitely all over Britain as a child. And Thunderbirds, I wasn't a massive Thunderbirds fan. I don't think I ever read a Thunderbirds comic. Don't even know if I knew they existed. I kind of missed the first wave, and then the second wave I was probably a little bit too early when they did it on Blue Peter with the Tracy Island. That was something I was never going to do. And then I was probably too old for any other iterations of it, and it just never really tickled my fancy, so to speak. I remember getting the single of Parker singing to Lady Penelope. There was like Thunderbirds I Go song or something, not the busted one, but another one. I remember getting the 45 of that, but I think I just got anything that was in the jukebox at the time. My auntie used to be able to get me, she used to fill jukeboxes, and when they emptied them, they'd give some away and I could just have them. So one of them was the Thunderbirds one. But this artwork is great. It's kind of weird, isn't it, if you think about it, artwork of a puppet. The James Bond comics here, which I have seen a collection of these in a book. This is from 1969, but I definitely saw the collection of James Bond comics. I don't think this one is from a James Bond. I think this one is just a kind of general adventure style comic influenced by James Bond. So what people were watching at the cinemas, you'd see in comics, and more that way round. So it would be on TV or at the cinema, and then make it into a comic rather than kind of using the comics to influence what was on at the cinema, which I guess you got later on when we had the big massive Marvel boom of the 2000s. So it's a bit of a strange reversal, really, that we were kind of, like you'll see later on, some of the things that were in Look In or other magazines that came off TV. So this one, Return of the Claw, more adventures here by Carlos Cruz Gonzalez. And yeah, like, it ties in with all of the things that were around at the time, the sort of the massive popularity of James Bond and the TV versions, The Saint and all those kind of things. It would make sense that they'd make them, that kind of thing, into adventure comics. And then you might remember these as well, kind of these that kind of went into the Commando comics. I didn't really read the Commando ones. I read the Football Monthly comics, which were kind of similar, but this one, these kind of adventure or war stories, this one, Captain Hurricane, really, for some reason, they just really stood out. I love the little comics, they were like half or a quarter of the size of a regular comic. The Football Monthly ones and the Commando ones, I did like the look of them. Commando, like I say, never really got into, but the football ones I absolutely adored. In fact, I went back and bought about 20 of them off eBay, because the stories had just stayed with me for so long. So yeah, this one from 1972. It looks a lot older, but then they were kind of making them to look like war stories. And here we go. Here is, like I say, about television influencing comics. A Morecambe and Wise Tap Happy story here. I spent a lot of time looking at this one. I couldn't believe it. I've never seen a Morecambe and Wise comic before. I had seen some strange comics in Look-In, like there was a Cannon and Ball comic every week in Look-In, but this one was so cool to see. I spent a lot of time reading this one just because I thought, wow, I didn't even know that this existed. I love the style of it. Very similar to the kind of thing you'd see in Look-In. I mean, blimey, they used to do Duran Duran comics and 5-star comics in Look-In, and just whoever was in the zeitgeist at the time. I'm not sure if they did it. I was just going to say Bobby Davro, but I don't think they did a Bobby Davro comic, but he was in Look-In a lot. So yeah, there was loads and loads of whoever was on TV or popular at the time, they would make a comic out of them, and this Morecambe and Wise one is a fantastic example of that. It felt like a real find. I felt like a bit of a historical discoverer of things that I didn't know existed. So this one by Terry Wakefield from 1976. Pretty amazing, I think. Yeah, I'd love to see more things like that and find maybe a collection of this kind of thing where it's all comics about famous people that maybe you wouldn't have remembered, or it kind of takes you back to a time in history. So yeah, I really did spend a lot of time looking through Tap Happy. Very straightforward, simple stories, but lots of fun. And I met this guy as well. I can't believe it. Wouldn't give me an autograph. In fact, it was a little rude, just ignored me. But yeah, this gives you an example of the sort of the lineage of something like Rogue Trooper, for example. Those kind of action war comics, like I mentioned earlier on, the Commando comics, so violent, so visceral, usually not a lot of colour in them other than the front cover, but were they popular. A bit like the people who were really into their little green toy soldiers, like little moulded toy soldiers, then they would really be into these comics. I did love playing with my toy soldiers, if I'm honest. But I just never really got into the comics. My friend gave me some Rogue Trooper stuff later on, and again, I couldn't quite get into it. I know that Duncan Jones is making a film of Rogue Trooper, so maybe I'll go back and read them all after, if I really like the film. I've been looking forward to that one for a while. But yeah, this one, you command a fleet in action, exciting quiz. Yeah, like war was just it ties in with Action Man as well. But speaking of Look-In, these are the sort of things you would find in Look-In every week. The Danger Mouse comics, so good, so bright. I think I probably turned to the Danger Mouse comics first when I got Look-In. Get Look-In through the letterbox every week. Get Beano, which sometimes I would stop with Beano and then get Dandy for a bit. The Orbis football collection, if you remember getting that. My pocket money exclusively went on comics. So I'd probably get 25p a week pocket money and spend 20 of it on comics and then 5p on sweets. So yeah, you had to choose carefully what you wanted. So whether it was Look-In, often it was Look-In because you get posters. In the posters, you'd have like Knight Rider posters and 18 posters. So, as well as the comics that you get to read, as well as the TV listings. So yeah, it was a good thing to get. So this was from 1982. I was getting Look-In from around 84, 85. And that made me about 6 years old. So, I was a really prolific reader as a very young man. It was funny because they kind of didn't think I was very bright at school, and they thought that I wasn't reading. I was pretending to read. It was quite funny. They were like, well, no one can read it that quick. You're not reading it, you're just pretending. Then they'd ask me a load of questions and I'd have all the answers. The only thing I really was good at was reading, and the only thing I wanted to do was read and sort of write stories. So it was kind of strange to, be reading these things quite young, even though some of the stuff in it was like, what am I doing? Like 5 years old or whatever, reading about Duran Duran. So yeah, here was the actual the site of the gallery, and yeah, it was a really nice setup. As you can see, I was there completely alone, able to take it all in, go through everything. So I've not really missed anything. There's going to be some things that come up later on that you'll see that I think might surprise you, that they're just there with no one watching them, no one keeping an eye on them. I just wandered in, paid my money, not very expensive, wandered in and just spent ages walking around, looking at everything completely on my own. There was a few things like that for if you brought kids along, little competitions and drawing and things like that. Some first editions or some special editions of comics. But mainly I just walked around looking at everything on the wall. This exhibition is over now. There is a 1990s themed exhibition in this place, but I believe it is hopefully moving around the country at some point. So as you can see, that's how I walked around it and kind of filmed everything as I went. But yeah, it was just me having a good old look around. I enjoyed it, actually. Particularly the timeline of it, trying to work out what I was familiar with. The hardest or the weirdest thing about that being that obviously some of these things I'd then gone back and bought after the event, so I've got almost like false memories. So these were some of the big editions or the special editions that they had in glass cases, the Dan Dare ones, the Flash, Captain Britain. Not a lot of people remember or talk about Captain Britain that much. Don't think that'll ever make it into TV. Who knows? When they run out of things to do, they might do. Who knows? Eagle really does look like some sort of incredible artifact. It was so well designed. Like I say, that chromatic effect. And here we are. We're at the Watchmen section, something that really excited me. I literally have read everything to do with Watchmen, even the stuff that probably as a big Watchmen fan I shouldn't. The sort of more modern ones where they've broke down and told the stories of individuals. They have nothing to do with Gibbons and Moore. All of those, and the TV stuff. I've watched everything, I've read everything, I've collected everything. It really did speak to me. The initial Watchmen comic made me feel like I was reading something along the lines of Catcher in the Rye or something, like really like a powerful literary classic. And it's the first time I felt like I was reading a graphic novel. And yeah, I got to see the actual artwork in different forms and different versions. I really got to see it up close and personal. And they were saying when I asked the person on my way out, like how much some of that was worth, and some of it they were saying was like absolutely priceless. And yeah, there would have been alarms going off if I'd have tried to tuck it under my jacket and leave. And as you can see, here's the different versions of it as we go along. You know, such a powerful story, such a great, entertaining, different take on. I think it changed comics forever, Watchmen. I think it changed how we looked at them. It changed what we thought we could do with them. You know, even the later Vision comics, I think, were really influenced by this. Some of the really great Vision comics, so they're probably some of my modern ones, or Jessica Jones or Alias comics, some of those just really influenced by these. And yeah, it's maybe the way that we present comics on film was probably most influenced by these as well, like what could be done. These and Frank Miller as well, I'm sure. You know, the Daredevil and Elektra comics of Frank Miller, definitely very influential, Sin City and all that kind of thing. And obviously Dark Knight being massively influential and important as well. And Dark Knight Returns. So yeah, these sorts of Eagle Moss British versions of comics, you'll see the name John McCrea come up a lot now. So you've got to see a really cool sketch, one of his sketches there of Daredevil from a Spider-Man comic. So I was absolutely buzzing to see that. It's great, and like I say earlier on, just to see people doing these in pen or pencil and then see the next steps and the next steps is something you just don't get to see. As you can see here, like the sort of the addition of ink and the sort of the shadow and how they do that. I mean, for me, it's like magic. It's impossible for me to recreate. I could not do anything like this because I just can't draw for toffee. The kids used to laugh so much at my drawing. And John McCrea here, you know, that when we started getting into the almost realism and real life and real stories in comics, you know, sort of almost like kitchen sink dramas of comics. You know, he did a lot of those in the Troubled Souls series, and just things that I didn't really read because maybe I wasn't mature enough to understand them, or, you know, I was still wanting a little bit of Weird and Wonderful and explosions and things. But these were really incredible as well. If you look at how people do, you know, really serious issues in comics these days, then you can see the influence here. It's almost like being able to put like a Boys from the Blacks, like an Alan Bleasdale drama from TV, and put it on paper, and people can connect to it that way. Just have to accept that they're reading a comic. Sometimes people are like, oh, well, it can't really mean anything or have any depth if it's a comic, which is just such a narrow way of thinking and unfortunate way of thinking, because you miss out. It's a bit like thinking cartoons are for kids or picture books are for kids. There's like incredible picture books with incredible artwork that people are missing out on. There's incredible animation like Spirited Away and things like that you're missing out on. And the same goes for some of these stories that are sort of shared by Dave McCrea here. And again, the artwork is so unique and it kind of realistic, but also very bright as well. And again, we've got David Lloyd here, and some of the versions of V for Vendetta, which a lot of people will be familiar with because of the film, which I'm not sure how well that did. I don't think I paid attention to how well it did. I just watched it and was like, okay. I'd never read the comic. I didn't have that connection with it. But I know for some people, it's had an influence on how they look at politics, and it's also had or how they present politics or what they do. But also it's maybe something that for some people they look at it the way I look at Watchmen. But it was really cool to see that. I know that, what's that group called online, and they're called Anonymous, they kind of use the same visuals, the same iconography to get their points across. So it's definitely had an influence in real life. I've always had an interest in the sort of later Scottish creators such as Richard Case and Grant Morrison, of course, who wrote so many great things like Preacher. But I never really got into Doom Patrol. Strangely enough, all of the series have now been put onto Amazon Prime for free, so I might go back and watch those because the TV show looks really interesting. And Doom Patrol as a concept looks really cool as well. Here are some other British versions. As you can see, here's some of The Flash from the 80s as well, the end of everything. And it is great just to see the little scribbles and notes and stuff on the margins. It really makes you feel like you were there, or you get to see the process of things. I know I keep using that word process, but I'm just kind of blown away that I got to see this, because you only see the final part of that, don't you? So the end of everything from 1990. There's quite a few other things here as well that, kind of show how comics progressed. So you might look at this and think, this is Dennis the Menace. But no, there was people influenced at the time by Dennis the Menace, or even in the 90s. We tried to use that sort of idea, that concept, and just put their own little twist on it in other comics as well as the Beano. And I think things like this are really interesting, because we do get, not to say pop will eat itself, but you do get, sort of similarities between characters. I wonder if there was any. I would love to be a fly on the wall and find out how people thought when somebody created something that looked very similar to their comic. Is it like in comedy, where people would be really upset if somebody sort of stole their joke? Or was it because it was quite a small community, it was just go for it? I know that a lot of artists moved from comics to comic, so there might not have been a lot of rivalry there. I really don't know. I'm not quite sure. But that one there, the one we were just looking at then, was from the Beezer, and it wasn't Dennis the Menace. Thought we could have a real slow down here and look at some of the DC work, the different artwork here for Batman. And again, it's, to say that this is just kind of throwaway stuff really takes away from the fact that look at the detail and the time and energy that has been put into this section. As people are fond of saying these days, hang it in the Louvre. Don't hang it in the loo, hang it in the Louvre. So yeah, looks like he's doing a suplex there, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, there was some really great. I remember getting some of the Batman annuals that had British artists work in there as a young man, and I really did enjoy getting those. And it was kind of a mixture of American Miller stuff and Adam West stuff that we were watching over here. So yeah, newspaper comics, little small strips, just maybe sometimes like 5 panels or 6 panels. I remember reading this. This one was in the old Current Bun in the Sun, which I didn't get. But I know people who did, and sometimes people would cut them out for me. Our own little version of Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, not ninjas. We don't have ninjas in the UK. We're not allowed to have ninjas. It's too dangerous. And like earlier on, I mentioned about Baxendale. I think Baxendale had a real influence on people who create, like the Donald brothers who created Viz. We've got the fat or the rotund ladies, shall we call them? So yeah, those were really special. Interesting story. The first ever writing competition I ever won was from Roy of the Rovers. Because of that, I got a Sky Sports polo shirt, and I got my name mentioned in Roy of the Rovers. Roy of the Rovers was probably a comic that I probably got the most, more than any other really, on a weekly basis. And this one was from '93. Kind of, sort of, around that time it was tailing off. It did come back, but it didn't quite stay, which was a shame. So this one's a really interesting one. If you know the story, the Sex Pistols on the Bill Grundy show, this is a comic of it that is in like a kind of a pop fanzine kind of thing, TV filth. And I just absolutely love this because a number of times I'm doing that impression, he's like, you fucking rotter, like that. And I just remember him doing it, you dirty bastard. Like that, just because it was quite a scary, transgressive moment for people anytime anyone saw it, because it's like stead, normal evening TV taken over by these, crazy, wild rockers. Obviously, they're not crazy and wild now. They're either not with us or selling butter on television. But, at the time, they were dangerous. So I found reading this about Bill Grundy and the show and the Sex Pistols being on it, I thought this was hilarious. I've never heard of this, never seen this. This is the first time I've ever seen anything like this. Free next week, your own Sex Pistol with every copy. It's like, and the Effers. Yeah. Bill Grundy and the Effers. He was just like, it was dead funny if you ever saw that clip, because he was just like, oh, go on then, say whatever you want, or, and then there you go, haha, it's our old pile of Sex Pistols, F off, you effing old effer. Yeah, this is great. I'd love to have a copy of that on my wall. It's just such a funny little comic of, again, capturing the zeitgeist of the time. That was on TV, so it was on the comics. Trail of the Man-Eaters from 97, something I wasn't that familiar with that particular series, but it was Judge Dredd. I actually, again, won something in a newspaper to go to a premiere of the Judge Dredd film, and that's when I really got into the comics. And a neighbour of mine gave me about 10 collections of them. At one point, I was really into Judge Dredd and really into reading 2000 AD, which 2000 AD did have Dan Dare in it at that time as well. And you can see it look through the perspective of Judge Dredd's glasses or his binoculars there. Yeah, man, it was so cool. I feel like, even I wasn't that taken with the Raid-esque version of Judge Dredd, or the Stallone one, even though I liked that when I was a kid because I got to see it for free. But yeah, I don't feel it's ever been realised on film, or even maybe an animated version would be great. The Doug Braithwaite Marvel comics, again, just kind of influence or showing the impact of British creators on some of the things that maybe we just automatically think are 100% American. So we've got these X-Men panels here that were done by Mr. Braithwaite. And I just think to see that progression from those ones right back at the beginning of this video to where we're looking at sort of more modern day, it's wild, really, the impact such a little place as Great Britain has had on the world of comics. Things like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, again, talking about Alan Moore's influence, massively influenced. And again, the style's so different. The style always kind of matching the era, matching the feel. Just this creativity just buzzing, and I'm buzzing through the British Isles, and it's just so good to see it. And a lot of the underground comics, there's a little reference to them here. So they've collected all the underground comic artists and characters together and made this poster here called Heroes of the Underground. And I'll show you some of the names of them. Some of them I might have been familiar with, maybe through some of the sort of kids' versions of fanzines that I would have seen. There was some that were kind of like slightly rude, but not so rude that kids couldn't read them. But yeah, there was some that were pretty crazy. A bit like how in America you had Crumb and Daniel Clowes and people like that. There was a British scene going on at the same time. Something I was probably not as aware of because I was probably too young. But I would love to find out all these different people like Chester P. Hackenbush and Firkin the Cat and Coochie Cootie and Dirty Duck and Weevil. Pudge, Girl Blimp, Jester. Some of these would tell you where they all came from. Zippy the Pinhead. Yeah, man, I would love to find these. I wonder if there's a collection with all these underground heroes comics in them that are just British ones, because I've definitely seen some like the 8-Ball comics and things like that, and the Crumb comics in America, but I've not seen the British ones. So yeah, that would be interesting. There's like 38 different creators on this. So yeah, It says it was from, there's a Chrysalis Books one, so maybe there is a collection somewhere that I can find. Some of them, they remind me a little bit of things like, like rhubarb and custard, or they remind me a little bit of Ralph Bakshi, like a combination of those things, really. All things you'd see in adverts, like the Trio adverts and stuff like that. So, yeah, there was a big push here at the exhibition showing us about the age of comics not being over, the sort of, of course, computer games and video games and social media impact on what we're doing. But, I follow a lot of artists on Instagram who do exclusively put their comics on Instagram. So, yeah, just to kind of show you that there's some more modern versions here, kind of influenced by the past, but there's a slight difference here, like in Smasher, sort of in the 2000s. We're still influenced by Dennis the Menace. The Beano's still going. The Dandy, I think, is still going. I think it's still owned by the same company. I'm not sure, I think I heard that DC Thompson's kind of been amalgamated with something else now, but it had a pretty good run for sure. I used to really like finding these different comics like Core and Topper and the Beezer and Whizzer and Chips, because they weren't around anymore, and just kind of poring over those annuals. And yeah, here we are in 1997. Alison Sampson working on Hellboy. Very striking. Isn't it amazing how striking something can be just with black and white? I always think, like, when done properly, it can just look so powerful. And obviously at some point there will have been no other alternative, so to choose to do it now is slightly different than not having a choice earlier. I just think it's so powerful, so well done. And even things that we used to get in, I think this was to do with like a promotional comic for Wallace and Gromit, all done by the same artist. If you think now, yes, a stop motion film, then getting a comic, it's kind of similar to what we were saying before. Whatever's on TV, whatever's popular, whether it's Morecambe and Wise or Wallace and Gromit, we'll get a comic version of it. And it's pretty cool that we're still doing that. We're still getting those. And I hope kids are still going out and getting a comic in their hands, because it's great seeing a digital comic, but it's even better having them, like, a comic in your hands and being able to go through it. And yeah, it feels really special, really, really cool to actually own and collect things. I think people are starting to do that a little bit more, thinking about DVDs and films and stuff where you don't really own them. So maybe you want to have them. If you like digital ones, you don't really own them. They can just take them off you, like Amazon and what have you. So having them and owning them, having them in your hands are really, really good. And you can pass them on to people and share them. And yeah, so I'm hoping kids are have that kind of feeling for comics now that we did back in the 80s and 90s. And the interesting thing about this as well, I will say, is that from looking through them, they all seem to be done by the same artist, the Wallace and Gromit ones. I suppose he's the comic book version of Nick Newman. So yeah, that's an interesting development. But I guess there were always comics inside other media. For example, I used to get Doctor Who comics of the Colin Baker era. They were inside Golden Wonder crisps. So you probably, were able to access comics and comic book art in a range of different ways. I remember those tiny ones. And sometimes you could get comics in cereal boxes as well. Like there was a Weetabix gang, and they were kind of like a Weetabix group of football hooligans, and you could get them inside your cereal box. So yeah, Hodder and Staunton there making some Wallace and Gromit style comics there, which were pretty cool to see. Comics for a new generation. And I guess it goes all the way back to the beginning. What we had on our screens, we get in our comics, which I think is pretty cool. It feels like you're getting a bit of extra material, a bit of extra content, as they would say. Speaking of extra content, can you like and subscribe and share and all that kind of good stuff if you have a moment? That was smooth, wasn't it? Crackers in space. Wow. And you can see, again, the different sort of uses of bits of sticky paper and notes and things like that. Kind of storyboarding and how they did these things at the time, which for me is just awesome to see, even if I'm not the world's biggest Wallace and Gromit fan. And, but I was a massive fan of this. If you remember Tony Hart, he was maybe our first introduction to like being able to try and draw things. Tony Hart and Morph. I did not realise there was a Morph comic. I have a feeling there was maybe some in Fast Forward magazine, which was the BBC's version of Look In. So anything that was on BBC would have probably been in Fast Forward. But before that, there was another BBC Kids magazine that had some, I can't quite remember what that was called before Fast Forward. But yeah, Morph. Remember his friend Chaz? Morph was so much fun. I used to really love watching that on Heartbeat. And yep, we got to see some other different, more modern cartoons here, made by British artists, of course, but from Marvel properties in this case. We've not really covered a lot of Marvel in this video, which I think is actually, in a strange kind of way, quite refreshing, just to show the range of different comic book artists, influencers, and some things that you would definitely not have anywhere other than Britain. For example, Morph and Morecambe and Wise. So this is another Eagle Moss. The Eagle Moss company, they do like the little part works as well of different comics, so you can buy them from different sections and piece them together in a folder, a binder, or build a picture from the spines as well. And there's loads of different companies that do that. Once they've got you, that's it. You've got to keep building the spine, and then they extend the spine. It's a nightmare. Well, yeah, I feel like someone who's been caught in that. And yep, just to kind of go over some of the key things that we saw in actual, glass cases, the Girls in Love comic, and oh man, I always wanted to be a member of the fan clubs. The Dick Tracy comic there was a good one that I found. And just to reiterate how excited I was to see all of these, can you tell? all of these Watchmen comics. And it just felt like being that close to history and something that I absolutely loved. It felt like a real privilege. It's been a privilege to talk to you about it. Speak to you soon.